We're looking a bit like a three-speed country at the moment. We've got WA and Queensland, locked borders but free citizens. New South Wales starting to move out with a staged withdrawal from lockdown. Of course, in Victoria, lockdowns, on they go, and no real clarity when they're going to end. The uncertainty can't be helping business. I know it's not helping the mental health of anyone in lockdown. Where's this all headed, and when are we going to have some sense that there is truly a national plan?
Well, the problem is certainly that the premiers have different views about the levels they agreed as part of the national plan on reopening, easing restrictions gradually on 70% of double vaccination and 80% of double vaccination. Now, of course, from the very beginning, we've had Mark McGowan saying, oh, well, he's wondered about the definition. Well, this is now really coming to a real striking point here. We've got Victoria clearly getting out of hand again with Delta. Daniel Andrews, who was the lockdown man, has now said, well, we have to live with COVID. So he's shifted his position. We've got uncertainty coming out of New South Wales about what they've said, yes, double vaccinations at 70 and 80%, but what will it actually mean? We're not getting any clarity out of New South Wales, which is so far the leading state on wanting to open up. Queensland remains a nebulous position where they're allowing people in, they're getting a zero COVID, but also talking about wanting to open up for business, particularly in the southeast, and Mark McGowan in Western Australia. But there's a threat in Western Australia and the Northern Territory to Indigenous communities. This will not be a Freedom Day. The premiers are not on the same page, and the Prime Minister is trying to put them there, but it's actually just not working. Also, as we see, yes, there's been a big surge in vaccinations around the country, but in New South Wales, one of the leading states, things are starting to slow. We're getting to that stage where it's going to be the really hard bit. This was the experience in the US, in the UK and everywhere. Once you got a high level, that was fairly easy fruit, particularly where there was a fear, COVID-driven fear in New South Wales and now Victoria, vaccinations. Once we get to that 80 plus, it's going to be very hard to get the rest of the population. And we see today Gladys Berejiklian trying to throw out the threat and the incentive to people saying, well, if you're not double vaxxed, you may not be able to participate in any openings we do have. So again, another layer of confusion from Gladys Berejiklian on what is going to happen, made worse by her Deputy Premier Barilaro, indicating that, oh, well, if you're unvaccinated, you might get the same privileges. There is real confusion, and this is when it's really getting to the sticking point where the easy road has been made on getting vaccinations up. The rest is the very hard work.
Yeah, just on New South Wales, I have to say they're almost close to 80% first jab, and if you've got 80% with one jab, you would assume, you'd hope that those 80% migrate to having two jabs. Not so anywhere like that in Victoria. Forget WA. I mean, yes, the borders are closed. People at least have some freedom. There's no end in sight in Victoria. If you look at the modelling that I've looked at, it goes right through until, at best case, December before we see freedoms for Melbourne. There's been a staged lifting of restrictions for country Victoria last week. I think that's the problem. Between the two, New South Wales and Victoria, you've got the bulk of the Australian economy, and there is a pathway out in New South Wales. There is not a pathway out in Victoria. And I have to tell you, Dennis, increasing anger at the lack of clarity, the lack of certainty, no detail, no one fronting the cameras to explain things. And of course, the Prime Minister, with all the will in the world, completely impotent as the national leader here.
Well, there's no doubt about the fact that the premiers are calling the shots. In Victoria, Queensland, Western Australia, they're all calling the shots. Now, what we're seeing, though, and you talk about lack of clarity, we saw on Friday, Gladys Berejiklian gives a clear impression she wasn't going to have a daily fronting of the cameras, that it was unnecessary, particularly as the harder news started to come through. This will be the period when we're getting to perhaps a slowing in vaccination rates, a rising in cases, a rise in deaths, and this is not a good news space to be in. Added to that is the potential for questions at every press conference she has about what's the state of the ICAC investigation into allegations and investigations into a former boyfriend. It's not helping. The politics of the day are not helping, and we saw it again today and yesterday. Daniel Andrews having a real go at the federal government over the extra vaccinations going to Victoria and reducing it to another political shot. Now, I think that everyone's tired of this, and they're tired of the politicking, and we're not getting any clarity as a result of this continuing bickering between the premiers and between the federal and state governments.
All right, I'll come back to some of those issues with my panel a little bit later on. Talk to me about the fracturing inside New South Wales Labor. You've got the parachuting in of Kristina Keneally. I mean, I went through it just before I made a toil. She's had a gilded ride all the way through. She's never really been a vote winner, but she gets picked up and moved on and protected. She's now going out to the Western Sydney seat of Fowler, really upsetting the local branches. And of course, we've got the news today that Joel Fitzgibbon is going to quit politics after 25 years, which will be a big loss for them, not just in the seat of Hunter, but on Labor's right, which I think keeps the party honest. What do you make of it all?
Well, I think my instinct is that there's something very odd happening in the New South Wales Labor Party. In fact, senior Labor MP used that exact word to me before I came on the program. There's a whole lot of pressure building. We've got the pre-selection season. That always makes it difficult. But here we've got some added problems. Joel Fitzgibbon, while he says, I think I've moved the party to the centre as he announces his resignation. And basically, I thought from the day he got in at the last election, that Joel would not see it through to the next election. But what we've got is today Anthony Albanese suggesting that the ANZUS security pact should include climate change. Now, this isn't moving the Labor Party to the centre on a crucial issue like national security, which is in the focus right now with the fall of Afghanistan and the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We're talking about climate change. This is a mixture of Labor climate change friendly policy with other policies. We saw this during the GFC when they combined a climate change friendly policy, a roofing insulation, with economic stimulus. It didn't work. It was a disaster. Now, I think what's happening here, we're seeing these wider positions being played out by the personalities. Kristina Keneally, why does she deserve all of this treatment? I cannot understand it. Anthony Albanese said, we've got all these diverse people, and he included Anna Lee. Anna Lee's come out and said, this isn't good. Now, what is going on here? And of course, the only thing that Kristina Keneally can't achieve in the Senate that she can achieve in the House is either the leader or the deputy leader of the Labor Party. We can see why Tanya Plibersek, on a whole range of issues, would not be happy about what's going on here and the promotion of Kristina Keneally into the senior position in the lower house for New South Wales. So I think that there's a great deal going on. We're going to see what we're seeing publicly is just a touch of what's happening underneath. Fights between the unions, fights between the left and the right, fights between people who support Anthony Albanese and those that don't. And those are some are preparing, not perhaps for victory, but for loss. This is really deeply embedded within the New South Wales Labor Party.
You are spot on, and people have intimated to me over the weekend that this could cost them the election. And a lot of them are telling me things that perhaps in ordinary time they wouldn't be telling Peta Credlin, but they're quite happy that, the gloves are off in this fight, particularly in New South Wales. Dennis Shanahan, as always, great to have you on the show every Monday, but thank you for your analysis tonight.
Thanks, Peter.